It is not weaponizing the Department of Justice to demand accountability for those who weaponized the Department of Justice. And nobody knows what that looks like more than President Trump. We are not going to tolerate gaslighting from anyone in the media or from anyone on the other side who is trying to say that it's the president who is weaponizing the DOJ. It was Joe Biden and his attorney general who weaponized the DOJ.
Hello, and welcome to USA Today's The Excerpt. I'm Dana Taylor. Today is Sunday, September 28th, 2025. That was Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt speaking at the White House press briefing last Monday. A couple of days earlier, President Donald Trump had posted on Truth Social what some would describe as a chilling demand, appearing to publicly pressure his Attorney General, Pam Bondi. Quote, "We can't delay any longer. It's killing our reputation and credibility," end quote. And then later, in all caps, quote, "Justice must be served now," end quote. Former FBI Director James Comey has now been indicted. Who might be next? Is the Trump administration now weaponizing the Department of Justice in order to seek retribution from his political foes? For more on this developing story, I'm now joined by Chief Political Correspondent Phillip and Bailey. Phillip, it's always good to have you on.
Dana, as always, how are you?
Let's unpack this in stages here. First, let's start with Trump's post last weekend. Did this mark a change in tone? And if so, how?
Not really a change in tone. Look, Donald Trump, who's been in our politics now for about 10 years, has always been someone who has picked fights with people he feels have been his political rivals or personal foes. I do think, though, that the president is amping up pressure, public pressure, on his administration to punish these longstanding rivals and other political opposition. And this is something that he talked about during the presidential campaign in 2024. He talked about being retribution for his supporters. But in many ways, that is now being expressed for his own personal beefs that he's had with a number of different figures during his time in our politics. And I think, as the White House press secretary pointed out when asked about this, saying, look, these folks tried to ruin the president's life. So he's always been someone who has, not really tried to reconcile with the opposition, reach out to the other side and say, hey, let's get some cooperation. He said, look, I'm at war with these folks. I'm fighting these folks. And I think there was no place that was probably better demonstrated than during the Charlie Kirk Memorial, which sort of took on an element of memorial, but also political rally and Christian revival. And the president was very clear, even in that event, that he does not see any sort of reconciliation with his opponents or opposition.
As you said, Trump doubled down on his message of revenge at the memorial for Charlie Kirk in Arizona this past weekend. Let's give a listen.
He did not hate his opponents. He wanted the best for them. That's where I disagreed with Charlie. I hate my opponent.
Phillip, Trump's overt attempts to direct investigations and prosecutions by the DOJ are a marked change for the department, which has a long-standing tradition of independence and apolitical law enforcement. What are you hearing from legal observers here?
The interviews that we've conducted and spoken to and other former DOJ officials who have spoken out in public to this, look, this is alarming to a lot of folks, particularly since the U.S. Department of Justice's tradition of independence going back to the Nixon years, that look, the political prosecutors, the attorney general, the DOJ, all those folks should be separate from the political direction or agenda of the president. And there will be many people within the MAGA movement who will say, aha, well, what about when President Biden did this or President Obama did that? So there is a lot of finger pointing going along here. But the legal observers who we've quoted and spoken to have said, look, it's undeniable that Donald Trump is trying to weaponize the government to attack his political opponents in explicit terms. There are obviously examples of previous presidents making some questionable decisions, including former President Biden, who pardoned his son, right? Used the pardon pen to pardon Hunter Biden, which raised several eyebrows, including from Democratic lawmakers who felt that was a poor choice, particularly since President Biden promised he wouldn't do such. But when it comes to President Trump, to have a president explicitly say, I want to go after these folks, I want to see them prosecuted, I think is the alarming piece, because it seems to erode that traditional wall of independence between the DOJ and the White House that other presidents have committed to, not necessarily always in the eyes of the American public lived up to. But in this case, we have a president who is saying explicitly to his attorney general, get these people, get them now.
Let's talk about Trump's opponents and political foes, starting with former FBI Director James Comey, who's now been indicted on 2 counts. Tell us about the fraught relationship between Comey and the president, and what are the charges here?
The long-standing feud between former FBI Director James Comey and President Trump goes all the way back to the first term, right? Back when, in that tumultuous relationship, really, when Trump fired Comey for his role in investigating his 2016 campaign's contacts with Russia, which ultimately found through a special investigator that there was no collusion. The charges that Comey faces specifically are charges of both obstruction and lying to Congress based upon, as the indictment reads, a September 30th, 2020 testimony where prosecutors are now claiming that Comey falsely said that the day that he hadn't, quote, authorized someone else at the FBI to be an anonymous source in news reports, unquote. Mr. Comey has come out fighting. He has said that he's absolutely innocent and he wants a public trial. He cites his long-standing rivalry and personal relationship with President Trump, going back to the first term, saying he won't live on his knees. So this is there is a part of this that has sort of the personal drama between the two. There are many observers and senators and lawmakers who are saying that, look, we want to see what the evidence is. Democrats, of course, saying this is heading us towards a slippery slope toward a constitutional crisis. In fact, I think it was Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut who said we are already in a constitutional crisis. Trump's Republican allies on Capitol Hill, like Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa, who leads the Judiciary Committee, saying that we want to see what the evidence is and that if Comey did, in fact, indeed break the law, he needs to be held accountable. We've never been here before, right? Seeing a president go at a former FBI director so publicly and in such a personal way, calling for this prosecution. And then within a week of that call on social media, there's this indictment. So everyone is looking forward to seeing what these charges and how they'll play out. I believe the arraignment has already been scheduled for October 9th. We're all sort of sitting here waiting and seeing how this goes. But I think we're back to the phrase of unprecedented moments where a former FBI director has now been indicted and faces some serious political charges, serious legal charges here in this case where President Trump is overseeing and really directing, it appears to be, the Justice Department to go after his political enemies. And it will probably be the tip of the spear, so to speak, in terms of the president's direction and his real, enthusiasm of prosecuting these political foes.
Let's turn to Democratic Senator Adam Schiff next. Schiff sat on the House Select Committee that investigated the insurrection of January 6, 2021, when a mob of protesters overran the Capitol, assaulted police, and threatened the lives of the vice president and senators who were in the midst of a usually boring but sacred ritual of handing over power to the next administration. What's the latest on Trump and Schiff here?
Well, Senator Schiff, senator from California, has said that he's taking the president's comments as a direct threat, right? And if there's anyone who I think, when in the political atmosphere, Adam Schiff is another one of those posters on the MAGA board in terms of most wanted. MAGA's most wanted. Adam Schiff would certainly be in the top 10 of that list as well. He has said, look, again, he takes this as a serious threat. I believe he's also being investigated, like Leticia James, for some mortgage fraud investigations. But ever since being the real face of President Trump's first impeachment, he has been a target of the MAGA movement as well. So to have a sitting senator, right, to have a sitting lawmaker, this will certainly be cast, if he is eventually charged with anything, will be cast as a political theater and political conversation as much as it will be a legal one. I think for Senator Schiff, again, he has said that he takes this as a direct threat. I don't know if there's anything that he can really do other than continue to comment and have his own legal team gird against the DOJ. But we see what the president wants, right? These demands. We see the people he's removing from the DOJ and oftentimes installing people as U.S. attorneys or others who either worked on his campaign or worked for his direct private or personal legal team. And if there's one place that the president has faced roadblocks, it's been in the legal justice system. It's been through the courts, who don't abide by these political rules that he wants everyone else to abide by. And if the information's not there, if these cases aren't solid, then you may see a judge just throw this information or throw these cases out. But it certainly adds to, I think, the intrigue and to the alarm that not just legal observers have, particularly after this Jimmy Kimmel situation. I think that Americans are paying a lot more attention. Average, just regular day Americans are paying more attention to the president's actions and really asking, does this serve the public's interest?
And last but not least, Phillip, there is New York attorney Leticia James, who oversaw the case against President Trump for alleged mortgage fraud. What's happening with James?
Leticia James, who was one of the prosecutors who prosecuted President Trump during the campaign, what many conservatives and others were calling lawfare. She's also a focus of this. She's also been the focus of intense ire from the president for years. She's also being, again, investigated for alleged mortgage fraud as well. She recently spoke to Joy Reid on her program earlier this month, and she called these charges and investigation against herself and others frivolous and baseless. She says she intends to fight any of those charges. Again, when asked about this, the president's press secretary makes the point that, look, Leticia James tried to ruin the president's life, ruin his businesses. It should be pointed out that civil findings and civil suit against the president, that those litigation was thrown out by an appeals court. So certainly President Trump feels somewhat vindicated to a degree in that case involving Leticia James, but she is not backing down in terms of the threats of any sort of lawsuit or any sort of criminal prosecution, again, saying these are frivolous and baseless charges. And she appears prepared to fight this. But again, it's another one of those wait and see things where we're looking to see what this investigation, right, will turn out, particularly given the fact that the people that President Trump has put in charge of these investigations have said, look, I haven't seen anything here. I'm not finding anything. Eric Siebert, the acting U.S. attorney at the time, who was overseeing those criminal charges, those mortgage fraud investigation into James, and he informed DOJ that his inquiry found insufficient evidence to pursue charges, and he was subsequently pressured to resign. So it gives the appearance for the American public that, look, the president wants a prosecution, whether or not there's actual evidence there. And if, how much credibility will this hurt with DOJ overall, with the judicial branch, or with judges if they are to pursue this? It seems like the president doesn't really care about that.
Phillip, we've already seen the DOJ dismiss attorneys who worked with special counsel Jack Smith on his cases against the president, all of which has been dropped. Prosecutors who worked on any of the January 6th cases have also been purged. According to The Guardian, 70% of lawyers working in the Civil Rights Division at the DOJ are now gone. Are there other political foes out there that Trump has mentioned recently?
Well, absolutely. I mean, look, if you are someone who has been in President Trump's target list, you're still on that list. He has mentioned, for example, President Obama on a number of occasions saying, that he's the person who is responsible for the Russian collusion, right? Saying that, this is the person we should be going after. He was the one who oversaw that. Obama was, as we all know, not arrested. He's not been charged. But again, I think President Obama himself has come out and said, look, I stand by what my administration did. We investigated foreign interference in that election. But look, Trump's comments come after Tulsi Gabbard, his director of national intelligence, says that there is evidence of, quote, treasonous conspiracy, unquote, related to the intelligence about Russia's interference in the 2016 election. The focus on Obama was right around the time that the Epstein files were big in the news and at the forefront of a lot of even President Trump's supporters. So many folks looked at that as an outright distraction. He certainly still, for example, President Trump still mentions an investigation that he's launched into President Biden for use of the auto pen. Certainly he makes mention of people like Nancy Pelosi and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who he defeated in 2016. So across the board, whether there is an actual legal issue here or it's a political rivalry, the president has amped up that he wants these individuals to be prosecuted and looked at by his Justice Department. And finally, President Trump has had a belly full of this, all these excuses, all these delays. He wants a hammer dropped. Whether or not that actually results in, it seems, any actual prosecution or not, he wants the same thing that he felt was done to him. And you're seeing this a lot, Dana, like in our politics now, where the justification for certain actions isn't on the merit of a case or the merit of any evidence, but based solely upon, you did this to me, I want this done to you too. Not taking into account the nuance or the details, but simply because President Trump himself faced unprecedented prosecution, right, leading up to the presidential election, which many felt was an attempt by Democrats and others to keep him from the White House. Now President Trump, it looks pretty apparent to a lot of folks, now he wants his lick back. So again, we're all waiting to see what's going to be presented to the courts, what's going to be presented in these investigations, and it's going to be scrutinized. Or is the president simply hunting for a headline where he can say, see, they did something wrong too, they're being prosecuted, whether or not that actually turns into anything. A lot of this looks like it's the melding of political theater and our legal justice system, which has gotten the attention, I might add, of some Republicans. So we are in a space that we haven't been in this country to this degree, maybe ever. We're in another unprecedented era where the president of the United States is saying, these people who I do not like, who I've had political problems or issues with, I want them prosecuted as well. And whether or not our legal justice system regurgitates that or spits it right back out into the president's face, we're all waiting to see.
Phillip Bailey is a chief political correspondent for USA Today. It is always good to speak with you, Phillip.
Dana, thank you.
Thanks for watching. I'm Dana Taylor. I'll see you next time.